About a year ago now, I graduated college, and despite the doubts in my mind, despite the confusion of a lot of people around me, decided to become a freelance literary translator. And now I'm here today to tell you how it's been, sort of what I've learned, and most importantly, was it worth it? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new here, my name is Kate. I'm 24 years old and I was born in Seoul but grew up in Austin, Texas. And after graduating college last year with a degree in comparative literature, I moved back to Seoul to live with my grandma. And since then, I've also started grad school here, but I've also been working as a freelance literary translator and also making videos about books, translation, just my life in Seoul, adulting, etc. Today I was thinking we could just have a chat about sort of my translation career. It sounds kind of crazy to say that, but it has been around a year now that I've been trying to get it off the ground. Honestly, I feel like a year is both such a long and short time. It's kind of been a whirlwind. I feel like I've learned a lot, experienced a decent amount, and hopefully have some stuff to talk about, maybe a tiny bit of wisdom to give. So maybe sit yourself down, grab a drink. I have some sparkling water with ice in here today. And yeah, let's chat. Firstly, I just wanted to say, I'm sure if you clicked on this, you're somewhat interested in literary translation, but even if you're not a translator, even if you don't care about literature really at all, I hope that there's something here for everyone, or like something to talk about for everyone. I honestly think that anyone trying to do something that they love and kind of put work that they love out into the world will hopefully have something to gain or at least reflect on from this video. And I always want to hear about your sort of like passion projects and careers, so if anything comes up that you relate to or like you kind of have thoughts about, please let me know down below. Otherwise, just to talk about how I sort of got into translation and literary translation in particular, I have a video that details a little bit more of this, so I'll link that down below. And I talk about how I actually got kind of started in the industry or even realized there was an industry to begin with. Otherwise, I think like most people in the literary field, I've just loved books my entire life. There's really not much more I can say about that. I think for me, books are entertainment. They also act as like a bit of an escape, but also I'm just really fascinated by writing. And I feel like they contain really just like the whole world to me. Outside of like, you know, my friends and family and relationships, nothing else has really enriched my life like reading has. And yeah, I've just always loved books. And so when I was younger, I knew I wanted to study literature. I knew I wanted to study writing, and I was really lucky. My parents were very supportive of me just studying whatever I wanted. And so with that blind confidence, I applied to college as a lit major, and I ended up going to Princeton, and I also studied creative writing there as well. And so that's, I feel like, also important to say. I really wanted to be a fiction writer, and I still do. I was a writer before I was a translator, and I still consider my writing as like the most important sort of art or craft in my life. I just think it takes so much longer, and we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so I studied writing, I studied literature, and actually at Princeton I discovered comparative literature, which helped me a lot in sort of getting to translation. Essentially, for those of you who might not know, comparative literature is like an English major, but you do 2 or 3 languages. So for me, I did 2 languages, Korean and French, and then also English. And so you look at literature in all of those sort of language backgrounds, and you can write like papers in English about those literatures essentially, and also compare them and make connections across cultures, blah, blah, blah. Well, because of that, I was basically working with literature in different languages every day. And so I was interacting with a ton of translations. And even though I never took like a formal translation workshop in college, it just showed up a lot in my lit classes, which was really fun. And so I became aware that this was something that people had done, were doing, but I just never really thought about it. It was really when I started reading contemporary Korean literature that the thought even crossed my mind. So that was probably around 2021, 2022. I was discovering all these really great books written in Korean while I was here visiting family and stuff like that. And at that point, actually, there was like the beginning of the boom of sort of like translated works coming out in Korean. Anton Hur, Janet Hong, Deborah Smith, a lot of incredible translators had sort of led the way. And there were a ton of translations that came out in between like 2017 and 2022 that I was sort of seeing on the shelves and whatever. And so I became aware that this was like a thing that people were doing. And I was like, oh, I see why, because these like Korean, works are so cool. And so I decided to try my own hand at it. And honestly, it was just for fun, sort of like just to try it out. And I still think this to this day, but it was so like cool to me. It felt like a puzzle. It also feels both very creative and very methodical, which I really enjoy. And it makes it a lot easier to do more of. Whereas I've talked about this before, but writing is like very, very like, what's the word? Absorbing, I guess. Like you are fully in it, like immersive. Maybe that's the word. Like you are just pouring all of your emotions into writing. And so I don't feel like I can sustain it for that long anyway. But with translation, you kind of have both a subjective and an objective eye, which is really fun. And basically, I go into more detail about this in that video I mentioned. But I submitted my first translation to a mentorship program and I didn't get in, but the translator reached out to me and said, I see potential basically. Like, do you want to talk about the industry? Because it seems like you don't know really what you're doing. And honestly, that call probably changed my life, which is crazy. The translator was Janet Hong. She was so incredibly kind and sort of gave me an overview of the industry, which I've also talked about before in previous vlogs. I'll link them all down below if you are curious about like what the industry is like and how translation even works, or like, what contracts are like and stuff like that. But her explanations were so helpful in making sure I sort of wasn't wasting my time and translating like huge chunks of things that weren't going to get published anyway. She kind of walked me through how publication even works. And honestly, if I could say one thing here, it's that obviously, polishing your work is important. Spending time with things yourself can be really precious and important. But if you want to do something and if you want to make it like happen and grow, I would say just submit your work, just share your work. Yes, rejection is really scary, but you have no idea why people are rejecting your work. It could be luck. It could be just like they don't have space, like whatever. The possible reward of you getting that thing and the opportunities that it will bring you, and also the sort of self-validation that those spaces and opportunities give you of like, oh yeah, I am actually a translator. I am actually a writer or whatever, artist. I feel like that is so huge. It gives you so much sort of more belief in yourself. And I think that, honestly, I probably could have waited and really tried to hone my own translation craft before submitting. And honestly, I know a lot of people do that, and I'm sure there are pros to that as well. But I think for my sort of situation, I'm really grateful that I just worked on something that I really loved. I had fun with it, and then I immediately just started submitting just to see what feedback I could get, because it was largely very positive, and it made me believe that I could maybe do something with this. And that's not to say I haven't been rejected like tons of times. Like I mentioned, I started in writing, and writing is a lot bigger of a space than Korean translation. It's pretty niche, right? So I submitted to so many magazines and competitions and all that kind of stuff, starting probably, in high school. And honestly, I collected like dozens, if not like hundreds of rejections. But the thing that really helped me throughout all of this is, I've said this before on this channel, but I watched something where someone said you should aim to get rejections, not acceptances. Set that number high. I set it at like 50 one year. And what that does is it takes away the fear of rejection, and also makes you understand that rejection, especially in the artistic world, is not about actual talent a lot of the time. It's about a lot of other factors that we can't see, that people are dealing with behind the scenes. And so what's more important is like just getting your stuff out there, because the more places you submit to, obviously the higher your chances of getting something, of being published, of putting your name out there and getting started. And so that learning that early on in sort of like my writing life, I think really helped me with translation, because I immediately started and was kind of like, you know what, why not submit and see what happens. And so actually the year after I sort of started translating for fun, I was able to go to the Bread Loaf Translators Conference on a full scholarship. And that was where you can meet a lot of, working translators, all literary translators, and also be taught by people who've published a lot of books, published translations. And that was really amazing. I'd really highly recommend. I know someone who is one of my subscribers got to go, I think, after seeing it here. So if anyone else is interested, please do apply. I really recommend it. And then also specifically for Korean translation, by the end of 2023, I ended up getting the Literature Translation Institute of Korea, the LTIK's sort of Emerging Translator Award. And again, that was for people who haven't published anything. It was just like you had to translate something that they chose, and they chose the best sort of translation. And I'm so glad I applied applied to that. I think my mom actually like found it somehow and was like, you should do this. And I really didn't want to because I had an internship and like all this other stuff at the time. But luckily she was like, no, it sounds really cool. And I made myself do it. And I'm so, so grateful to myself and my mom for that because that's sort of like the biggest credential I have to my name. And it really helped me kickstart sort of my career. So those are sort of all the things that happened up till graduation. And when I graduated, like I said, I decided I wanted to do this as close to full-time as possible. I feel like this is a good time for a lot of really important disclaimers. I just think that, you know, when it comes to the creative field, there's so many different barriers to entry, and also everyone is in an incredibly different situation and working on incredibly different things. I think making a livelihood as any sort of creative or artist is just such a different question. It really depends on your background, obviously, if you have other obligations financially or just emotionally or personally, and also the field you're working in, how frequently you produce stuff, like all this stuff, maybe talent as well. It's so complicated, so I'm not going to say you should do this or you shouldn't do this or whatever. I just want to say that for my particular situation, it has been such an incredible privilege to move straight from college into a freelance career. Like, I know that's not possible for everyone. For me, I think it's important to be upfront and say I didn't have any student debt. Princeton has really generous financial aid, and so I didn't have to take out any loans. I didn't really have to pay too much myself, and that degree honestly has probably been the single most important thing in allowing me to sort of live my life now. Not to say you need a college degree from a good university or in your field to do this work, but more that I think it would have taken me a little bit longer without that help. Related to that, I started working in college doing tutoring and other things, and so I was able to save a decent amount of money, which made me feel a lot more financially secure graduating. And the very last thing that's also really important is that even though I did move to Seoul and everything, I'm living with family. I live with my grandma, and so my living expenses are probably cut in half at least, which I am so unbelievably grateful for. But as you can see, there's a lot of sort of different situations and caveats that I feel like have allowed me to make this work. I also think that practically in terms of translation, unfortunately, it really matters what language group you're working in. Even though Korean translations aren't published or like picked up as frequently right now as, you know, French or Spanish or German, sort of like really big languages, there are a ton of opportunities and resources in Korean translation, probably more than a lot of other languages, unfortunately. For example, Korea actually has a government agency called LTIK that funds a lot of samples and just like in general does a lot of grants that allow for publication of Korean translations, whereas other places without like government agencies that are funding that, it's a lot more difficult because the English language publishers would have to completely take on like sort of the financial burden of publishing and translating a book alone, whereas with a government agency it's split. I know that for Mandarin, Taiwan has a similar sort of institute, and I've heard that, you know, languages such as French, Spanish, German, Nordic languages maybe, and Japanese, I do think that there are a lot of resources there. Unfortunately, inequity across the world obviously is a huge thing, and especially in publishing, it's just so huge that I think the reality is it really does matter what language you're translating from. But that being said, people are translating from so many languages all the time, and being sort of hopeful, I do think that there has been a lot more increased attention on translated literature recently, so hopefully that's just opening more doors for more people. This might be a good place to get into sort of what I've learned about like the more financial side of literary translation, because I know people are really curious about it. I will say I think it's incredibly difficult to make a living just on translating. There are a couple star translators that have done it or teach and make that a big part of their living and are mainly translating though as their income, and I think that's really awesome, and hopefully maybe one day I will get there. Without going into too much detail, I would say personally for the past year, I would say like a third of my income has come from literary translation. The rest is a combination of a bunch of things, mostly tutoring work, scholarship, also increasingly YouTube, and, you know, other sort of miscellaneous awards and grants. Even though I consider myself a literary translator, even though I spend a ton of time translating, you can see that, you know, I'm not by no means financially a full-time literary translator. And I think that's really important to put out there. On the flip side, though, I will say in the past year, my opportunities in translation have probably grown exponentially. And I think this comes from sort of making a name for yourself. I would consider my start to be like Breadloaf and the LTIK award. And then after graduating, I was contacted by LTIK to do a translation sample, a funded translation sample. And so that was sort of like my first work opportunity. And essentially it's been sort of building from there. Luckily, I think the publishers appreciated what I'd done. And so they reached out to me again. I think it's really about creating that like initial small opportunity. Even that one thing, if you take it seriously and you do it well, it leads to more people contacting you about the, similar services down the line. And then if you can take the product from that and apply to other awards and grants, in my case, or sort of like pitch to publishers on the English language side. So yeah, with Korean translation in particular, there's sort of income opportunities on the Korean side with publishers and agencies and LTIK and sort of Korean institutions funding translation samples and things like that. So definitely take advantage of that, apply to those if you're trying to be a Korean translator. But then for all translation or any sort of literary work, there's obviously the income, and this is like the most important side, probably the most sustainable, which is the English language side for me. So because those are the books that are actually getting published, right? These are funding samples and sort of like trying to look for books to send here so that they can be published, and then you are paid from this side. But also on the English language side, there's tons of awards and grants. I will say that they are diminishing at the speed of light with everything going on right now. But in general, I just think, apply to everything you're comfortable applying to that you can with reasonably within your current schedule, because why not? You never know. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of the past year applying to do different things on both sides, talking with different people on both sides, also reaching out to people that you know in the industry. So, if you're interested in Korean translation, please feel free to ask me any questions. If you're interested in whatever industry, try and find literally a single person who works in it, and especially it helps if that's someone you want to emulate or really admire, and then just listen to their like sort of advice. And even if they don't have that much time, you can kind of do some stalking and figure out how they like started their career. And the great thing about writers and translators is they write about themselves a lot, like their work, and so I really like reading those too and being like, oh, okay, very helpful. And yeah, in general, for any translator, I would really recommend Anton Herr's blog. He has just such helpful stuff. He's doing so much for the community, truly. But anyways, the peak of all of this in the past year has been my first book deal. I talked about this in my past vlog, but yeah, I just signed my first book contract, and the book will be coming out in 2027, the translation, and I'll talk about it more, obviously. To be honest, I could not even imagine getting a book deal a year ago. I had one project going on, one thing that I was trying to get off the ground myself, like completely unpaid, which is what a lot of translators do as well. It's really a passion project, and I was crying, honestly, like every other week, because I was like, what have I done with my life? Am I going to be okay? But then I really enjoyed the work, so I was like, I'm going to push through, we'll see. But really it is that one opportunity that leads to another opportunity. And also if you just keep pushing and applying to things and also working on yourself and sort of like making sure your craft is getting better and talking to people, just make sure people know your name and your face that are in the industry as much as possible. I know initially that's really difficult, and there was a point where I felt like I knew absolutely no one, but if you just can get started by the smallest little things, by putting yourself in the tiniest of magazines and talking to a couple, like small editors or translators who are doing it part-time, and ask them about, how has it been so far or whatever. This is obviously very industry specific. Honestly, I think it's the same for like YouTube. If you want to become a YouTuber, look at the YouTubers you admire and just study them. Like even that is putting yourself more into the space, and also make sure that you're creating your work, creating your content. And I think like literally the speed at which things picked up has been so crazy to me. I would say I've had consistent translation work for the past like 5 to 6 months, which I know is not a lot, but that's pretty awesome considering like, there's 6 months of like less kind of like more sporadic work, and then at a certain point I just had a lot of different requests coming in and opportunities coming in, and it's just so surreal. It's not like I haven't had help along the way. Anton, who I've mentioned multiple times, helped me so much. I met him at Breadloaf, and he's just such a great mentor, and also other people that I've met, other translators in the community. Everyone is just so kind, and so I really found so much help through the people around me. But at the same time, I think so much of it has to be, at the end of the day, you believing in yourself. And even if you don't believe in yourself at that moment, believing in what might be and believing that it's worth it, believing that's something that you really want to do, I think that belief didn't waver, even if I felt really kind of crappy about myself and my skills a lot throughout the year. I think just the feeling of like, I want to do this though, has never changed. And I wonder if that's what allowed me to like apply to all those things and just keep sort of putting myself out there, because I was calling myself a translator and I was like, I am going to do this even if I don't really have that much work at the beginning. So that's kind of been my biggest like learning, honestly, of the year. I wonder if it'll be kind of similar with writing as well. Like I said before, I really love writing. I love fiction, and I would love to write my own stories and novels and whatever. But I think it's been a little bit trickier, the journey of calling myself a writer. I think the writing community is a little bit different as well. And I also just think that in general, it takes really a lot of time to write good stuff. And so I'm trying to be very patient with myself, and like I've been working on my stuff here and there. Nothing like, big yet, but more just sort of like short stories, making sure I'm keeping like a practice going. And I'm sure like if it comes to a point where I'm like, I want to take myself seriously as a writer and really push this forward, hopefully it'll be similar in the sense of like I'll have that belief in myself and I'll just see what happens, even if I get a ton of rejections or whatever, and it's a harsh world out there. I think I'm a little bit more sure now that everything will seem impossible at the beginning. Everything will seem incredibly difficult and far away, but it's really just those small steps that take you to the bigger steps, and then at some point hopefully the work will pay off and you'll find yourself at the beginning of sort of a career, at the beginning of something that you've really wanted to do, and you feel more sure of yourself and confident. I also hope I don't come off as dismissive of the fact that like a widening income gap across the world is a very, very real thing. Nepo babies are absolutely everywhere, especially in culture and like arts and those fields. And this is not to say that if something isn't working out for you or something doesn't seem possible, it's just because you're not believing in yourself enough. Like, I don't think that's true at all. There are so many different factors that go into, like I mentioned, if something is possible, and in so many ways I have been very fortunate in sort of my situation. I just wanted to say that, within whatever realities that you have to deal with, don't let your own lack of belief in yourself be the one other thing that holds you back. And also that if you love something and if you really want to try something, just start. Again, like I mentioned, it's not my main income stream. I'm also not living like a life of luxury out here with my translation career. But also, honestly, it's been worth it for me because I knew that no matter what job I had, no matter what sort of situation I was in, I was going to try and find any extra time to translate and to write. And I think if that is true for you as well, even if you have to do other things, don't let that sort of love fizzle out or die out, and just try to do something with it. Even if the timeline takes a lot longer, even if it takes 10, 20 years to publish your first book, which honestly for me with writing might be true, like we never know. I think that's okay. Like we don't have to do everything super speedily. Not everything has to be easy, and you don't have to make tons of money from something right away. I just wanted to say that I think the world that I just was exposed to was pretty discouraging, of people going off any sort of prescribed path and taking sort of a more risky path, or trying to do something especially creative that they love and make it into a sort of livelihood, a lifestyle of sorts or whatever. And I felt so uncertain and I felt so scared, honestly, by like the same time last year. But it's crazy how much can change in a short period of time. And I think so much of that has come from like, I love this, I'm going to do it anyway. So why not really try and do my best and, show up and kind of send my work along to people, try to get published if I'm going to do it anyway, if I love it. Yeah, so I know that was a lot. There's one last point I want to touch on related to sort of what I just said, and it's about AI and translation. I'm getting more and more questions about it, which makes total sense, like in my real life and also on my channel, about how do you feel about AI? Does it feel like it's threatening your fields or your job? And honestly, I think, what field is AI not threatening? I'm not going to say that I feel completely secure and amazing about, being a translator or even a writer or a YouTuber, honestly, literally anything at this point, a student in a world with AI. At the same time, I did want to say one thing, which is I think with literary translation in particular, if I'm translating cereal boxes, I think, my job might be a bit more in jeopardy. I want to say that with things in the arts, I'm not sure how things are going to go. I'm not sure how receptive people are going to be. I feel like speaking to the very specific niche of literary translation, number one, I think no translation AI can come close to what a human can do with literature, at least right now, because it requires interpretation. No translation is one-to-one, and every translation that each translator produces is going to be really different because translators are readers and they're presenting essentially an interpretation of the literary work that they're translating. When it comes to language, AI can't really do it yet. I don't think it understands how to create a sort of coherent voice and characters arcs and all this stuff just yet. Hopefully it won't ever, but I'm not going to say that. Honestly, I know how much things have changed even in the past year with AI, but I do think in this moment right now, I don't feel threatened by the AI technology that's out there, and at least no one I know is translating their works with AI yet, at least in the publishing field. I will say another thing when it comes to literature that is sort of helpful. It's confusing, but I think because unfortunately like reading is already sort of niche and the publishing industry is not that lucrative anyway, I think that people and readers and editors really value having human beings creating the stories and like publishing their work and promoting it and stuff like that. At least I know that as a reader myself, I would never read anything written by AI, and I think that's how a lot of readers feel, and I don't know if that'll change honestly with new generations, oh my god, but I do think that really helps knowing that there's sort of like a general moral standing about it in your community that you're working in. And like I said, because it's not inherently like a lucrative enough industry, I don't think like AI people are pouncing as hard on literature as they are on music and like film and stuff like that. I don't really know what the futures of other creative arts are, but I do think hopefully like there is sort of still a like consumer base that like really wants to resist this thing taking over. I don't know, I honestly could watch this back next year and be like, girl, you thought, like, truly, but we'll see what happens. I think kind of related to what I said before, I'm just going to do this as long as I can for as much as I can because I really enjoy it and it's been super amazing and fun, and I still can't believe I get to do it. It's just so awesome. Yeah. Okay, I've actually yapped for so long. I need to like lie down and just like stare at the sky for a little bit before I get back to translation. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful or just kind of gave you something to think about. And if you have any questions on translation, on just freelancing, on being like a young person in this world and trying to do something meaningful and feel good, literally whatever, please leave them in the comments below and we can chat. Otherwise, if there's just one thing that you walk away with from this video, it's that your passion and your love for something is worth investing in. Even for me, I have no idea where I'll be next year or in 2 years from now, if this will be sort of a detour my life takes, or if this will really be the start of like a long career. I genuinely have no idea. I just hope that this gives you some sort of inspiration that if there's something that you've been wanting to do, if there's something that you've always loved or like have really started to enjoy, and you want to start something with it, just do it. Only you can say that that time and energy is worth it in the beginning. Only you can be sort of like your biggest like believer or cheerleader in that beginning stage. I just want you to know that I'm there with you. I'm rooting you on, and I'm also so grateful for you guys just supporting my journey and being here with me. Yeah. A year in, I'm feeling really excited for what's to come. Hopefully just sharing more of my translator life with you all, and also just like the books I'm reading, the work I'm doing, all that kind of fun stuff. I'm excited to hear any of your thoughts or questions in the comments. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you very soon. Bye!